We're exploring whether security and geopolitics now has become central to economic development and planning in the backdrop of those horrific attacks. For instance, the big issue at the G20 summit in Antalya, Turkey this year clearly has been on the threat posed by terrorism, and heads of state have brought to light the economic cost of such acts of terror. Now, to discuss that, I'm now joined by Blanka Kolenikova, senior analyst at IHS, and Mr. Kanwal Sibal, former Indian ambassador to France. I'll come to you first, Mr. Sibal. The G20 statement that was put out a while ago clearly said that how rise in global acts of terrorism undermines international peace and that could endanger global economy. Do you think the Paris attacks now has brought to light the issue of terror now being a significant threat to the global economy?
I know, but I'm not very convinced at this kind of reasoning, because the problems of the global economy are not seriously affected by the rise of terrorism in the Middle East. After all, if you look back when Iraq was destabilized and Libya was attacked and the regime was changed, and then the Syrian conflict has been going on, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been going on, terrorism has been endemic in the Middle East. But that has not had any direct impact on the global economy. The direct impact on the global economy has been the financial mismanagement of the United States, and of course the decline of growth in Europe and all the serious problems that Europe is facing. There is the China factor, rise of China, which has implications for the global economy, and things that China does where they devalue the yuan. Then it creates a problem if there's a slowdown in Chinese growth, which has nothing to do with terrorism. There is a problem. Japan is not able to make its economy grow. It still remains in a state of stagnation. That's a problem totally unrelated to terrorism. The fall of commodity prices has nothing to do with terrorism. So I don't think this analysis, at least I'm not convinced, but I suppose in the wake of what happened in Paris, something had to be said, and therefore they have said this.
Right. Fair enough, Mr. Sibal. Blanka, coming to you now, the world output is at an all-time low since the global financial crisis. There are many uncertainties and issues. We've seen the IMF raising concerns over productivity stagnation, slowing growth in China, and now, of course, the recent news of Japan swinging back to recession. How would you look at it? Has Paris attacks indeed brought the issue of terrorism as one of the legitimate economic concerns for the world, or do you agree with what Mr. Sibal is saying?
The impact of these attacks on the economy is, in our view, likely to be limited and short-lived. Of course, there can be some negative immediate impact on the Parisian economy, which can have also knock-on effect on France and possibly on other European countries, especially those that are deemed at the highest risk of immediate attacks. However, when we look back at the London bombings in 2005 or Madrid bombings in 2004, we can see that the impact was limited and also short-term.
Staying with you, thanks. Yeah, but staying with you there, I mean, we've seen EU split in half over the issue of immigration and refugees. The economic rationale for immigration, of course, has been on the availability of vast pool of resources and the expansion of the labor force. But now many believe that the Paris attacks could strengthen the anti-immigration camp. What would henceforth be the economic impact of that?
Yes, of course. Well, Europe has been already polarized with regards to the increased refugee influx. And we can almost talk about Eastern versus Western divide. And of course, this will increase polarization of the public sentiment and the perception of the refugees. We don't think that it will have a direct and immediate impact on the government's policies or on the EU level in general. However, what can happen is that in the medium term or in the longer term, there might be a stronger support towards more nationalist parties, towards far-right parties. And of course, if these parties start to have a stronger grip on national parliament, and then they will also influence more mainstream parties or the government policies. And in that case, we might be looking at policies such as increased state protectionism, there might be slower privatizations. In some cases, especially in the countries that are not part of the EU or countries that are not inclining to join the EU, we may also see the cases of expropriation and nationalization.
Right. Coming on that then, Mr. Sibal, how do you see the issue of refugees then panning out? Because now even Sweden, which has been sort of liberally accepting refugees, even now they are curbing the flow. So, I mean, how do you see this panning out in the long term?
You see, insofar as the refugees are concerned, let's say the problem with Great Britain. Problem in Great Britain is not so much the refugees coming from the Middle East or North Africa or whatever. It is they are very concerned about Polish and other refugees coming, not refugees, but labor coming from Eastern Europe. And that is what has triggered off all these demands for controlling immigration. So far as Germany is concerned, it's interesting that when Merkel said that they will accept up to 80,000, 800,000 or 80,000, I forget the figure, 80,000 refugees, the head of the German industry has separately, in a different context, said that Germany needs these additional 80,000 or 800,000, whatever the figure was, numbers, because of the problem that you mentioned. So there was some commentary that, in fact, what Merkel is trying to present as a humanitarian gesture is, in fact, motivated by economic considerations. But so far as Eastern Europe is concerned, they are totally against any kind of migration of refugees into their countries. They are strongly opposed to it and they are rejecting it. And some countries, in fact, have gone to the extent of saying they'll only accept Christian refugees from the Middle East, but not Muslim refugees. So the whole refugee issue is a very complicated one and is raising all kinds of internal dissensions and tensions within the European Union. On the one hand, the European Union has to live by the values that it espouses. Open borders, receiving the oppressed people, being humanitarian, etc., in their policies. On the other hand, they have to look at the social problems that have already been created. You mentioned Sweden. Sweden has now facing a huge problem in terms of community relations because of the very large influx of people from the Middle East, and they are creating social tension in the society. And generally over in Europe, as you've seen, right-wing parties are becoming much stronger because they see the problems being created on the ground, problems of integration that are being created on the ground by the influx of these refugees with a different culture, different religion, different way of life, different social values.
That's an important point there, Mr. Sibal. Blanka, let's now look at the long-term implication of terrorism and the disorder it unleashes. Globalization, of course, has seen the rise of big, powerful transnational corporations which have lobbied for a long time for minimal government interference and involvement. But now, owing to the security concerns, we are now seeing MNCs being increasingly helpless and totally dependent on governments for law and order, like never before. So there seems to be a bit of a contradiction here, don't you think?
Yes, of course, the security and the risk to security are a very important part of the quality of the overall business and investment environment. And of course, the companies and the investors who already have a physical presence in certain countries or who are considering entering certain countries will be taking this into consideration. And they might be thinking about the midterm, long-term strategy, about the relocation. So the security, whether we are looking now or in the future, it will have a very important part of the general investment and business strategy.
Blanka, one last question from my side before I go back to Mr. Sibal. Could terrorism potentially have a deglobalizing effect where companies will focus more on home markets where it feels confident that the law and order situation is more secure?
Well, it depends on the exact nature of the terrorist attack. If the companies feel that their direct assets are at risk of to be targeted, then, as I said before, they might be reconsidering their reallocation and where their positions in the globally. So we may see a shift of in the midterm, maybe in the long term, towards the countries that they deem more secure. But again, as with the impact on the economy, this will be only one of the contributing factors that the investors and companies are likely to consider, and definitely not the only one or the leading factor for where they base their offices, where they base their headquarters, and in fact where they invest in the future.
Mr. Sibal, you were the former envoy to France, and you would have seen and observed the society very closely. It's multi-ethnic, multi-religious. Do attacks like these risk exposing the fault lines within the French society, sir?
Yes, of course, because France has a very large population of Islamic origin, if you like, mostly from Algeria. And they have been integrated up to a point into French society, but there are elements which have not been integrated, and they are the source of periodic social unrest, burning of cars, arson, looting, killings, etc., etc. So there is that problem. Now with the attacks that have taken place and demands from the right-wing parties that the government should become much tougher about immigration and also deal much more robustly with the troublesome elements, which means therefore going into these ghettos where these people are there to arrest people or question them, or close down mosques where there are radical imams preaching all sorts of radical ideologies. Now all that is going to generate further tensions, because there will be a feeling that Islam is being now targeted. Now, how to balance these two conflicting challenges that French society has? On the one hand, being open, democratic, non-discriminatory, and on the other hand, taking certain robust measures against a particular section of the population, which then will strengthen the right-wing parties and will encourage demonization of a particular religion and a particular ethnic group. These are very difficult issues that France faces, and after the latest attack.
Right. Let's leave it at that, Mr. Sibal. Thank you so very much, both to you and to Blanka, for joining us on The Big Picture.